You're standing in the laundromat 2 blocks from your childhood apartment on a Sunday afternoon, quarters in hand, watching a woman feed the same machine you used to feed as a kid while your mother worked a double shift, when your phone buzzes with a message from a client confirming a rebalance across a portfolio you now manage professionally, one that crossed $30 million in assets under management this quarter. You didn't need to come here. You have a washer and dryer in the house you bought 4 years ago, a house with a driveway wide enough for 2 cars in a neighborhood where nobody's mother has ever worked a double shift that you know of. You come to this laundromat anyway, once a month, and do a single load of towels you don't actually need washed here, because something about the hum of these specific machines still settles something in you that nothing else quite reaches. You reply to the client's message standing right there between the dryers, confirm the rebalance. Fenwick got his first real bonus at 26, a modest one by industry standards, but larger than anything either of you had seen up to that point, and he spent it the way people spend money they always assumed was coming eventually. A nicer apartment, a car he described as finally appropriate for someone in his position. A habit of ordering the second most expensive bottle on any wine list, because his father had once told him the second most expensive bottle is where the actual value sits. A piece of received wisdom he repeated at dinners the way people repeat things they've never had to test against an actual bank balance that could run out. He tells you once, over drinks, that money just makes sense to him, a phrase he doesn't mean unkindly, but that lands on you differently than he intends. Because what he actually means is that he's never once had to sit with the specific fear of a number reaching zero, and so every financial decision he makes exists in a kind of theoretical space, informed by principles rather than by the memory of what it felt like to watch an adult you loved count quarters out of a sandwich bag at a laundromat. The apartment, the car, the wine, none of it is dollars, not really, not in the way it would have been dollars to you at 26. It's confidence, purchased in advance of any evidence that the confidence was earned, financed by a family safety net that means Fenwick has never once had to develop the specific, watchful relationship with money that eventually became the actual skill you get paid to apply to other people's portfolios. This is the first quiet truth underneath everything that follows. Growing up with money and growing up without it don't just produce different bank balances. They produce different nervous systems, wired around money in ways that don't fully unwire themselves just because the number eventually changes. Fenwick relaxed into his first bonus the way people relax into something they always expected to arrive. You didn't relax into yours at all. You did something else entirely, something that took you years to fully name. And it's the actual answer to what changed first, long before the $30 million ever did. At a dinner years later, once you both managing comparable books of business, Fenwick asks you, genuinely curious rather than unkind, why you still seem so careful about money given how well you're both doing now. You tell him it's just how you operate. He nods, assumes it's a personality trait, unrelated to anything specific, and goes back to describing a vineyard he's thinking about investing in. He has no idea what a laundromat 2 blocks from your childhood apartment still means to you on a Sunday afternoon. You don't mention it. Mentioning it was never going to make either of you enjoy the dinner more. Fenwick isn't a bad person, and it would be easy for this comparison to sound like judgment, which isn't the intention. Hes simply operating with the only nervous system he's ever had access to, one that was never taught to brace for a number reaching zero, because it never once had to. He wanted the apartment, the car, the wine to say something about arriving somewhere before anyone had to ask whether the confidence underneath it had actually been tested by anything. You've never once needed a vineyard investment to prove anything to yourself, and it isn't a virtue exactly, more the specific hard-won byproduct of 19 years spent needing to know, with total precision, where every dollar was before you ever had enough of them to stop needing to check. What changed first, before any money did, was a specific decision you made at 9. It's about staying the kind of person who checks, the exact same discipline that turned a notebook at 19 into a career managing other people's money at 38. Fenwick has never kept a notebook, never needed to, and it isn't a moral failing on his part. It's simply that nobody ever taught him the specific vigilance that comes from having once needed it, the way growing up in a house where money was scarce teaches you a kind of attention that growing up in a house where money was assumed never quite requires. What you understand now, watching him manage his own considerable success with a looser hand than you ever be able to manage yours, is that the notebook wasn't really about the money either. It was about never again feeling like money was something that happened to you, rather than something you actively tracked and directed. And that feeling, once built at 19 with almost nothing to track, never fully leaves, even once there is considerably more to track than a notebook could ever hold. The market drops sharply the spring you cross the $30 million milestone in assets under management, an 18% correction over 6 weeks that tests every client relationship you have and, more quietly, tests something in you as well. The specific, old fear you thought you'd fully outgrown, resurfacing in the middle of the night more than once during that stretch. Not because your own finances are actually at risk, but because the body remembers things the bank statement has long since stopped reflecting. Fenwick handles the correction differently, and not necessarily worse. He's calm throughout it, genuinely calm, in the specific way people are calm about things they've never had reason to fear at a bodily level. He reassures clients smoothly, confidently, and it isn't performance on his part. He simply doesn't carry the old weight you're quietly carrying underneath your own calm, professional voice on every one of those same client calls. You get through the correction the same way you got through every hard stretch since 19, by returning to the notebook's modern equivalent, the same Sunday ritual, checking every number, confirming for yourself, methodically, exactly where everything stands, not because the numbers are actually in danger, but because the checking itself is the thing that quiets the old fear, the same way it always has. It isn't logic that gets you through the 6 weeks. It's the ritual, run one more time, the way it's been run 1,000 times before, since long before there was anything meaningful to check. Same storm, entirely different internal weather underneath it, between you and Fenwick, despite managing comparable books of business through the exact same 6 weeks. The habit that mattered during this stretch wasn't dramatic. It was the same 11 to 18-minute ritual it's always been, run with a little more care that particular spring, a little more attention, because the old fear needed the ritual a little more than usual that season. Your clients never knew the difference. Your own accounts never actually needed the extra attention. But you needed it, and giving it to yourself without shame, without pretending the old fear had been fully outgrown just because the number had gotten large enough that logic said it shouldn't matter anymore, turned out to be exactly the thing that got you through. There's a woman named Georgette who runs the laundromat you still visit once a month, someone who's worked behind that counter for over 20 years, who mentions to you once, while you're folding towels you don't actually need washed, that she recognized you the first time you came back years ago, recognized the particular way they just accumulate, quietly, in the exact same unglamorous spaces where the original fear first took root, until one day, the fear and the accumulation have both grown large enough that neither one fully makes sense without the other. She tells you one more thing before you leave that particular Sunday, almost as an afterthought, folding a towel of her own with the same unhurried motion she's used for over 20 years. She says she thinks the reason you keep coming back isn't really about the laundry at all. It's about making sure the 19-year-old who started the notebook never gets fully erased by the version of you that manages $30 million now. Because the 19-year-old, she suspects, is the actual reason any of the rest of it exists. Your mother calls you at 6:50 on a Tuesday evening, her voice carrying a strain you haven't heard from her in years, since long before any of this, she's had chest pains serious enough that she finally went to urgent care instead of waiting them out the way she used to wait out everything when you were a kid, and the doctor there wants her to see a cardiologist immediately, this week, a specialist whose earliest opening is a self-pay appointment she can't afford on her own. You book the appointment before the call even ends. You do not open a spreadsheet first. You do not run the mental math that used to occupy so much of every unplanned decision, back when you were the one counting quarters into a laundromat machine while she worked a double shift 2 blocks away. The cost simply doesn't attend the moment. It isn't in the room with you at all, not even as a passing shadow, not even as the ghost of a fear that used to define every conversation about money you'd ever had with her. This is the truth every other habit in this story was quietly building toward, and it's the only one that isn't really about money at any point. It's about what the notebook at 19 and the Sunday ritual that grew out of it, and the $30 million now managed for other people were actually for underneath everything else. Not Fenwick's second most expensive bottle of wine, not the vineyard he's still deciding on, not even Georgette's 2 decades of a laundromat retirement fund built in total quiet. It was always, from that first notebook entry written by hand at 19, about purchasing its own absence from your mind, so that when your mother's voice strains slightly on the phone at 6:50 on a Tuesday, your full, unmortgaged attention belongs entirely to her, and to nothing else competing for the same 11 seconds. That's the highest job money ever does, and almost nobody markets it that way, because it doesn't photograph well, and it doesn't fit into a vineyard investment or a second most expensive bottle of wine. It doesn't buy the specific ease Fenwick's always carried, the ease of never once having needed to develop the vigilance you built instead. It buys the silence in which the only thing that actually matters that evening, your mother getting the appointment she needs, the specific fear of the last 20 to 5 years finally quiet for one single night, can be heard without a single other thing competing for the same attention. You drive to see her that weekend, once the cardiologist's initial workup comes back manageable rather than dangerous, and you sit with her at the same kitchen table from your childhood apartment, the same table she brought with her to every subsequent, slightly better apartment over the years, and she doesn't ask you a single question about what the appointment cost, because it has never once occurred to her, watching you grow into whoever you've become, that cost might still be the thing standing between her and the care she needs. That absence, the fact that the question never even arrives in the room, is the entire architecture of a notebook started at 19, made visible for the first time at a kitchen table that's followed both of you across every version of your lives since. You go back to the laundromat the following Sunday, the same monthly ritual, quarters in hand, a single load of towels you don't actually need washed. Georgette's behind the counter, same as always, and she asks how your mother's doing without you having told her anything about the cardiology appointment, the way she seems to know things about you without either of you ever discussing them directly. You tell her better. She nods and goes back to whatever she was doing before you walked in. Money never fixes a Tuesday evening. It never fixed the strain in your mother's voice before you'd said a single word back to her, and it wouldn't have arrived any faster if the notebook you started at 19 had somehow produced $30 million a decade sooner than it did. It would have changed nothing about the chest pains that already happened, or the appointment already needed. Money doesn't undo the things that already occurred. It only decides quietly and years in advance whether the next hard Tuesday costs you a phone call full of the old fear resurfacing, or a phone call full of nothing but attention for the person who needs it. You still haven't told Fenwick about the laundromat, or the notebook, or any of the actual architecture underneath what he assumes is just a personality trait unrelated to anything specific. It's because the telling was never the point, and somewhere around Georgette's quiet observation about the 19-year-old who started all of this, you finally understood why. The habits were never really measuring the $30 million at all. They were measuring how far the old fear had traveled with you, and how much space it still occupied even now, on a Sunday afternoon, folding towels in a laundromat 4 miles from a house it took you years to fully believe you were allowed to own. Your mother mentions, a few weeks after the cardiology appointment, that she's noticed you still bring towels to that same laundromat some Sundays, a fact she's clocked over the years without ever asking why. You tell her it just feels right somehow, and she nods the way she nods at most things about your adult life these days, without pushing further, the same restraint she's always shown around subjects that seem to matter to you in ways she doesn't need explained in full. She mentions almost as an aside that she still keeps a version of her own old grocery ledger in a kitchen drawer,